You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 29th of November 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Conflict continues between Georgia's government and Georgia's people over Georgia's European future. The luxury travel realm packs its fancy luggage for Cannes, and our weekly wrap-up of what the last 7 days have taught us. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. It's Friday, so it's our mostly in-house daily, and the Monocle staffers who failed to flee into the winter's night with sufficient alacrity were Tom Webb, Natalie Theodosi and Hassan Anderson. They'll discuss the day's stuff, plus we'll have the latest on those protests in Tbilisi. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and first to Georgia, where Tbilisi is once again hosting rowdy protests against the government's increasingly diffident attitude towards the European Union. Georgia's Prime Minister, Irakli Kobakidze, announced that Georgia would suspend its pursuit of EU membership until the end of 2028, a date heard by many opponents of Georgia's government as more or less the 12th of never. The move by Georgia's government followed the passing of a resolution by the European Parliament to the effect that Georgia's most recent election was dubious on a number of levels. I'm joined now by Mikhail Benidze, co-founder of Georgia's European Orbit, a Georgian civil society organisation. Mikhail, first of all, the protests, as I understand it, are ongoing not just in Tbilisi but elsewhere in Georgia. What's your sense of the scale of them right now?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me. Just a quick correction. I currently represent Georgia's European Orbit, which is one of the civil society organizations. But nevertheless, the protests are very quite widespread, as you already mentioned today. Yesterday's protest, as you probably saw, was quite violently dispersed, and I think that only encouraged more and more people to go into the streets. So the streets of Tbilisi are full today. There's a very high number of people, unprecedented number of people, especially in the last several weeks, because we've been having protests since the October 26 election. But tonight is definitely by far the largest crowds. And also, as you already mentioned, the protests currently are ongoing in other large cities of Georgia, in Kutaisi, in Batumi, and a few other places of smaller protests. So, yeah, this is quite kind of across the country already.
What sense are you able to make of what the Prime Minister, Mr. Kobakidze, has said about his views of Georgia's EU accession? Because he is still paying, as I understand it, an amount of lip service to it. And I guess he has to, because that aspiration is enshrined in Georgia's constitution. But are people interpreting him saying, I'm going to put this off until 2028, as him actually saying, I don't ever want to do this?
I think that's the sentiment, that most people believe that him suspending the kind of potential EU accession talks, because we are not yet at the stage where the accession talks are open even. And by the way, just to mention that these talks have been already suspended by the European Commission because of backsliding of democracy in Georgia, and because of adopting the Russian style foreign agent law and the LGBT propaganda law, which both of those kind of go against the EU values. So the EU kind of accession, EU integration path has already been on hold. But now he's saying that basically we're not even going to try to improve anything. We're not even going to try to seek to move forward on this path and to show any progress. And most people, I think, are representing this as basically saying no to the European Union indefinitely, because you cannot, they are saying that after opening, then they will open the talks in 2028, and then Georgia will be ready to join the EU in 2030, which is completely, unlikely and irresponsible to think that the, accession talks and the chapters that need to be closed in this process can be even covered, in 2 years. So this basically means that, it's never really going to happen, and they're going to come up with another excuse down the line. And so most of Georgians see this as a not only suspending the EU accession talks, but also suspending the constitution. As you already mentioned, EU integration, European and Euro-Atlantic integration is part of Georgia's constitution. It's Article 78, which mandates and which actually requires all the state institutions to be doing their utmost to move Georgia forward towards this goal. So essentially, by saying this, the ruling party, which itself right now, its legitimacy is very much under question because of the widespread election rigging in October. And most of the European countries have not even congratulated Georgia's ruling party on the election win. So essentially, they have also gone out of the constitution. And I think that's what's angering most people. And that's why they are in the streets. And they see this as kind of a fight to maintain Georgia's European future, which is something that, as opinion polls constantly show, is something that over 80% of Georgia's population kind of consistently support.
Even if 80% of Georgia's population do support that aspiration of EU membership, Georgian Dream, the governing party, do clearly have some support. I mean, even if there were irregularities with the most recent election, some Georgians are voting for them. What's your view on where that split is in Georgian society? Is it generational? Is it the city versus the country? Basically, who are Georgian Dream's people?
It's a little bit of both. It is definitely generational, and most young people are pro-European, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there are a number of older people also in the streets right now, and you can see those on the broadcast. And it is often perceived that the city population is more kind of anti-Georgian Dream, and rural areas vote more for the Georgian Dream. But we have to also understand that there's a lot of part of that election manipulation is a lot of pressure and abuse of administrative resources. And so it is usually easier to kind of intimidate and pressure citizens who are more kind of maybe economically more challenged in the rural regions, which don't have a lot of other opportunities. So that may be, I don't know whether that might be the reason why a lot of kind of rural populations are more prone to support the Georgian Dream. But you're right that there is still significant amount of support to this ruling party. Another aspect, I think, that contributes to that is that they have been using, again, Russian-style kind of disinformation and propaganda in their messaging. So despite them doing number of steps now for years, and especially this becoming, more and more evident since the start of the war in Ukraine, despite that, they have been doing things that are kind of contrary to the European aspirations, contrary to the European values. They still run on the campaigns that still display, the European Union flags on their billboards, and their main kind of tagline for the election campaign was kind of "with dignity, peace, and prosperity towards Europe." So I think that is still kind of there are a lot of people, and with quite strong grip on nationwide TV stations, propaganda TV stations, essentially. I think they're still trying to convince a lot of people in Georgia that they are still they also want to move Georgia towards Europe. But I think increasingly, especially after the steps like yesterday's, I think increasingly, even amongst the civil servants, which usually are perceived to be more pro-government, there have been now a number of statements coming from the diplomats working within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education, a lot of kind of professionals, a lot of kind of civil servants that work in these institutions have now come out with public statements and petitions that they denounce this yesterday's statement, and they see Georgia's European future as something that guides their work as well, and the Constitution.
Mikhail Benidze, co-founder of Georgia's European Orbit. Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Monocle Daily. In August 2021, the US military withdrew from Afghanistan, ending a 2-decade presence in the country. The withdrawal left behind an estimated $7 billion worth of hardware, including aeroplanes, helicopters and artillery. So begins the documentary Hollywoodgate, in which director Ibrahim Nash'at follows the Taliban in the immediate aftermath of their recapture of Kabul. Monocle's Hassan Anderson sat down with Ibrahim to discuss the film, beginning by asking how he succeeded in gaining access to the Taliban's usually highly secretive inner circle.
With only my camera, I came to see in whose hands this country was left. Me, I saw what I saw. I came from a journalistic background. I've done journalism for over the course of a decade. And during my work, I was able to film with a lot of world leaders, presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers. And that has given me a good portfolio. And I reached the Taliban out when they just got into power. And at that time, they were seeking validation through journalism. And that's how I basically gained my initial access. But after that, the process became that I was in, and I was trying to find people from within that would allow me to stay longer every time they would kick me out. And I always say if I arrived 10 days later to Kabul, I would have never gotten such an access.
The atmosphere wasn't necessarily always welcoming for you. There were threats made about taking your life if they didn't like what you were doing. So you spent a year with the Taliban. What was it like working around them in that atmosphere?
I think what was important for me on the access is to make the film, and this is what my life was about. I had to focus completely on making the film, and all the hardships that were happening, having to sleep in one room with 16 or 17 Talibans on the floor for weeks, or having to spend all the time with them without really talking anything what's in my heart and just listening and nodding. And all of these hardships that we're getting through, and having to just exist in one room with them for the whole time, which is very hard to do when I think about what's happening today in Afghanistan and what happens to the Afghans and how the international media has completely left Afghanistan behind. It becomes very necessary to remind myself that I had to continue going for the people of Afghanistan, because whatever I faced is nothing compared to the daily suffering of the people of Afghanistan today.
Because maybe the way you shoot, the cinema verite style, and the fact that you let so much of the scene breathe, some of the human behaviours of the Taliban come out, which is bound to happen no matter who you film. So there are kind of mockumentary style scenes in this film. Was that something you were planning to see when you started the project?
I'm a big fan of cinema verite, and I tend to not like doing interviews, and this is the main reason why I left journalism to documentary, was to create images that speaks for itself. Of course, when you film someone very close for 1 year, you get to see the human side. But the question is the human side a good side or a bad side? So humans are humans. We're all humans. And the other problem is that in Hollywood, Taliban has been always portrayed in a way that they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't drink, they just kill. They don't do anything else, kill and slap a woman in their faces. And this is not true. Every human being has good values and bad values. When the bad values take over the good values, this is where the problem comes. And what we try to do is to make you understand where they come from or who they are without sympathizing with them. So I hope in understanding them, we could avoid having more people in the world that think the same way.
It strikes me that's an incredibly difficult task to set yourself, to show the truth and the human side of the Taliban, whilst at the same time trying to not seem as if what you're doing is sympathizing with something that's become very oppressive. So how did you How did you strike that balance? And was there a lot of difficult work and decisions to be made in the editing room?
I think we've had the privilege of being in the editing room for 1 year with a team of filmmakers that are beyond my ability to even express how incredible they were. And they are people that I did never even dreamt of having a master class with, let alone think that they will all sit in one room looking at the footage that I filmed and try to make a movie out of it. I had a scene of them learning how to swim for the first time, and I would not put that in the movie because I don't have another similar scene of them killing, because I don't want to use the violence pornography. I did not want to even film it or see it with my own eyes. I refuse that in the art that I make. So as long as I didn't have this in my movie, I wouldn't have the other one when they are learning how to swim or to play tennis. There's another scene where they were learning how to play tennis, and very, very funny scenes that we decided not to include them in the movie because we don't have something that balances it out on the other side that shows the full image.
Let's talk about the reactions to the film so far, because there have been criticisms that you've given a platform and a human side to the Taliban, whereas others have praised the fact that you've been brave enough to go in there and show what they've allowed you to show and beyond. You mean you've had to flee Afghanistan as well because the Taliban were not going to let you go if they'd seen the rushes. But with all of those reactions, how have you felt about them, and what do you think that the truth really is in terms of what you've done with the film?
The reality is that the Taliban are in power in Afghanistan. Nobody is talking about Afghans. Women of Afghanistan are left behind. They cannot talk loudly in the street. They cannot go to the park. They don't have the right to have education. Men are freezing in the winter. With the La Niña year that's coming now, people are going to be freezing to death. No food. Poverty lines are beyond imagination. The whole system that was built for Afghanistan was built upon aids from outside, which majority of it has stopped. So the suffering of the Afghans and what's happening today there is the reality. And if we keep ignoring the fact that the Taliban are there and face the fact of how can we deal with that situation, it's just going to go worse. So ignoring Afghanistan is the problem, and not knowing who the Taliban are and what they are doing to Afghanistan, in my point of view, is a huge problem, because people of Afghanistan have seen a lot of wars, and I hope that the world will not go to Afghanistan again with an invasion, but try to go with a solution to what's going on, a diplomatic solution, without legitimizing the Taliban.
That was Ibrahim Nash'at, the director of Hollywoodgate, speaking to Monocle's Hassan Anderson. You're listening to the Monocle Daily. This is The Daily on Monocle Radio. Next week, the latest iteration of the international luxury travel market will be occurring in Cannes, and a delegation from Monocle Radio has spent much of this week annoying the rest of us by looking ostentatiously forward to it. Joining me now is one of this bitterly resented crew, Monocle's deputy head of radio, Tom Webb, whose luggage is right now being liberally sown with itching powder by vengeful colleagues while he's distracted by being here. Tom, what will Monocle's presence at this thing, which I haven't been invited to, look like?
I'm sorry, Andrew, luxury Muller. For those who are jealous, this is a trade fair, I must add.
It's a trade fair in Cannes, Tom, when in London it's cold.
It is, and the actual conference venue has the most amazing ocean view, and Monocle are going to
I think that'll do. Tom Webb, thanks for joining us. No, but seriously.
We're having an enormous presence this year. In fact, if you can imagine Monocle designing a first-class air lounge, we have exactly that, with a bar and also a pop-up radio station, and we'll have Tyler Brûlé there, along with Chris Lord and Emma Nelson and myself, and we're hosting very, very big names across the next week.
So basically everybody but me has been invited. Okay, good, I get that.
And there was an official invitation as well. We are hosting a cocktail party on the Tuesday evening. For those who are in Cannes, do please pop by Tuesday at 1800. Everyone except Andrew, of course.
Who else will be joining us apart from every person who works at Monocle other than me?
So the big names that will be attending are mostly in hotels and accommodation, though. Mm-hmm. all people from the world of travel, from aviation to luxury experiences, are attending. We're going to have the Belmond CEO, the Accor CEO, and also some smaller chains. We've got Chapter Roma, and we have Gleneagles that just featured on the menu. They've got a wonderful new cocktail bar. So we will also be joining the Briefing and the Globalist as well across that. So do not miss anything on Monocle Radio next week.
I mean, it's obviously always a little bit hard to know in advance quite what the themes of an event like this are going to be, but they usually like to telegraph some idea of here's the sort of stuff we want to talk about. What strikes you as the important motifs this year?
Well, the big test that came just last month from the world travel market, not luxury, happened in London, and the big talking points there will be replicated in Cannes. And this is the slight rise in travel demand. Last year, the biggest travel demand rise that we've seen in the industry, and people spending more once again. Those were big themes last year. They will be carried on to this year. The new trend is a term that I know you're going to hate already, coolcation.
You're right, Tom. I do hate that already. What is a coolcation?
It's mostly a trend experienced in Europe. We've had very, very hot summers, 40 degrees in many popular tourist countries and towns. This is people moving to cooler climes for their holidays, Antarctica, Iceland, Norway, and hoteliers are also looking to invest in such places. One other theme I wanted to mention is solo travel. And these are people that embark on very long cruises, luxurious cruises, but all on their own. And it's all about self-reflection and spending that little bit more on personal luxury.
Are there particular countries that are regarded as up and coming other than those coolcation destinations you mentioned? That is the second and last time I shall ever utter that phrase. But those aside...
well, let's talk about one together, shall we?
Go on.
Morocco.
Yes.
I've just got back from Morocco, and it is a big one. It's been growing steadily for quite some time. They're now investing in new rail routes and moving into luxury accommodations, particularly luxury riads in Medinas. And I know you stayed in a very lovely one in Rabat.
I did. I was in Rabat a while ago, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, doing a story for Monocle, and Rabat is delightful. Everything I'd ever heard from other people about Casablanca and especially Marrakesh led me to believe I would dislike both of them heartily. But Rabat, it just struck me, and I don't know what your more recent experience was like, but I just kept walking around thinking this is all the really great stuff about a proper Middle Eastern city with absolutely none of the attendant hassle, to the extent that I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to buy a rug. And I went to the bit in the Medina where people sell rugs and actually kind of had to make a bit of an exhibition of myself to attract their attention. Whereas, of course, in Marrakesh, even if you went out to get a cup of coffee, you would be chased down the street by several of them waving kilims at you.
And I completely agree. I think Rabat is just the most wonderful city, beautiful place. And they're, again, invested in new tram lines. I do just also want to mention, while we head to Europe, Spanish islands, including Mallorca, Palma, really moving away from very cheap package holidays into luxury travel. And we're seeing the same in Greek islands as well. There are 6,000 to choose from. So they are focusing on that.
It does say here, just finally, Tom, that there is a revolving dance floor at this thing. That sounds like it could cause more problems than it solves. Although, having said that out loud, I'm not sure what problems a revolving dance floor would solve unless you count the lack of a revolving dance floor as a problem.
Or you on it, which there will not be.
No, tragically there will not. Always next year. Monocle's Tom Webb, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller. I am joined now by Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi, who has been to a place she is going to tell us all about. Really went all in writing the script this week. Natalie, welcome to the show. Where is it, in fact, you have been?
So I've just come back from Oasi Zegna, which is in Bielmonte, just outside Milan. And I had a tour of the factory that Zegna produces all of its clothes, the house of the Zegna family, and we even took a lift up to the mountain. That's also, a lot of it is owned by the family, and we had a very nice time enjoying the snow and the nature.
So you've been to an extremely pleasant part of one of Earth's most pleasant countries, i.e. Italy.
Pretty much. I think you summed it up perfectly, Andrew.
That sounds ghastly. Because to be clear, though this is the seat of the fashion family of that name, it's not this isn't just a factory and a warehouse. They've built basically like a whole wonderland there, right?
Exactly, and it's the heart of the brand. So it's really interesting to go and see where everything is made and understand their values. It's quite a fascinating story. The founder, Menegildo Zegna, created everything in the 1920s. He moved into that area because the water is some of the finest quality water in Italy. So for producing wool, he wanted to be there. He started creating the factory and building slowly. And he grew from there, but he also wanted to help the community around. He would say that, if you want to create quality fabric, quality clothing, the people need to also live a good quality life. So he started planting trees on what was completely barren mountains. He built a hospital, a pool, a ski school. He created an entire community. And you can see that in 100 years, that community is still going. The roads that connect Bielmonte to the rest of Italy were built by him. The hospital is still there. It's now run by the government. And his grandsons and his son and daughter are still in Villa Zegna running the factory. And those values that he created 100 years ago are still at the heart of the brand. So it's a fascinating story and fascinating to see.
I mean, that all sounds like abundant reason to visit. And as regular listeners might be aware, I'm not somebody who really needs an especially good reason to go to Italy. Basically, the vaguest pretext that anybody can come up with, and I will be straight on a plane. But what was the particular reason why you were here this time?
So I went there as there was an event for press like myself and also customers, loyal customers of Zegna. And it was organized by Zegna alongside the German e-commerce company My Teresa. Mm-hmm. And it goes to show it's quite interesting that these excursions are happening much more. And customers do want to go and see inside the brand where things are made, understand about fabric as much as design, and really experience the world, meet the family, meet the designer. There's a lot more of these one-on-one interactions and these intimate events happening between customers, brands, retailers.
So clearly, well, stop me if I've got this wrong, but clearly they think the history and the heritage and the story of the brand is itself a selling point, that when people buy one of their items, they're also buying into this?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think now every brand, every business in fashion wants to use heritage and this idea of community as a big selling point. But in many cases, it's a lot of marketing talk and not much substance. But being within the Zegna world and the community, you realize that they're not making it up. There's a real story of a family. There's real values. The founder really created a community around Bielmonte, and they're very genuine about their values and about how they run their business.
And when you go there, what are you actually able to see in terms of how they make what they make?
So I had a private tour. So we could go around the entire factory. We saw how the wool is dyed. I met the team that does this thing called invisible mending. So they check manually every single centimeter of fabric that is produced by the Zegna factory, and they're so quick. They're just running through their hands, and they have red stickers, that even if there's like a teeny thread or the smallest default, they mark it and they mend it by hand before it's presented to the design team to then create the collection. And they produce something like 1,000 different new fabrics and color combinations every year. So speaking to the creative director, Alessandro Sartori, he was so excited about the process and saying how much it inspires him and that it's literally like working in the best kitchen with the best ingredients.
And is this something they're looking to expand, this idea of a private experience? Obviously, you were there as a journalist, but if people just fancy going along because they like their clothes and are interested in buying more of them, is it possible for anybody to do something like this?
I think they're doing more and more of these experiences. Obviously, for the moment, you do have to be a Zegna customer, and it is the kind of experience that is more available to VIP customers. But Oasis Zegna, the mountains in the area that is owned by Zegna, it's open for everyone. Everyone can go and enjoy the nature and get a sense of this region that is essentially built by Ermenegildo.
Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi, thank you for joining us on The Daily. And after this, we will recap what we learned this week. We learned this week how very wrong F. Scott Fitzgerald was when he somewhat pompously declared that there are no second acts in American lives. A literary reference this early on, better pace ourselves. We learned specifically of the second act of former Florida Congressman, unhorsed nominee for U.S. Attorney General, and various other things our lawyers tell us we should allude to only extremely carefully, Matt Gaetz.
Oh, no.
Fair comment. We learned specifically that Gates' second act appears to be an account on Celebrity Dignity Cemetery Cameo, where Gates will do, at your request, within 24 hours, it says here, a message such as this.
This is Matt Gaetz wishing happy birthday to Alan. Man, you're turning 70 years old. That is a big one.
For 400 quid... We learned that one of Alan's kids is clearly really keen on the old man's Corvette when the time comes, for a start, but we also learned that maybe Gates isn't as dumb as he looks, which, let's face it, would be an ask. Can I get some general muttered agreement? Seriously, 400 notes a shot for knocking out a banal birthday greeting which doesn't take longer than 30 seconds. You could do dozens a day, while we're painstakingly assembling for a fraction of that fee meticulously excogitated satirical reviews of the week's news, which we can only do every 7 days, to say nothing of the time that goes into writing these scripts and thinking up recherche combinations of sound effects to annoy the producers. Honestly, we're as vexed as a toucan which has tripped over an accordion and fallen down a well into a pile of banjos. That's good work, thank you.
It's fine. It's fine. I have absolutely nothing better to do.
Anyway... Here in the UK, meanwhile, we learned that recently installed leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition and imminent probable future Cameo account holder Kemi Badenoch has some interesting ideas about how democracy operates. Indeed, we learned that Badenoch was agog at a petition posted upon the UK Parliament's ridiculous petitions website, which promises a government response to any absurd notion attracting 10,000 signatures and consideration by the petitions committee of any fat-headed fancy that racks up 6 figures. We learned that some Yahoo had posted one calling for a general election, a whole 4 months since the last one, and that, at time of recording, nearly 3 million other Yahoos had signed it. And we learned that Badenoch believed this was worth mentioning to the Prime Minister.
There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work.
We learned, therefore, that Badenoch may be on thinnish ice when asserting that anyone else doesn't know how things work. As a pretty serviceable definition of how things don't work is Prime Ministers resigning because an online petition has attracted the signatures of IP Freely, Ivor Biggin, Hugh G. Rection and other always reliable contributors to such appraisals of the popular will. Anyway, we learned when we looked into it a bit that if this is how the UK is going to work from here on, a few other initiatives are also due urgent consideration, and for the absolute avoidance of doubt, we are making up none of these. We learned that petitions previously submitted to the petition site, if cruelly disdained by our elected representatives, include demands for fish and chips to be served in newspapers again, Doctor Who to be made a vegan, the protection of a particular pub in the Somerset hamlet of Yeovil, a pub to be built in the Welsh settlement of Bethel, and a knighthood for Ozzy Osbourne. Sure, why not? We learned, however, and would be fascinated by Badenoch's reaction to this information, that the most popular petition ever posted on the site, clearing 6 million signatures, and probably not all of them Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck or one or other of the Teletubbies, is for the UK to call off Brexit and stay in the European Union. However, we learned that if British parliamentarians believed that they had plumbed the most dismal imaginable depths of dishonour, the attitude of Serbia's parliament was very much, hold our Slivovitz. We learned that a bench-clearing brawl had besmirched the floor of the National Assembly in Belgrade. Apologies to any Serbian listeners of tender sensitivities for any unparliamentary language we may have just broadcast. There's not really a punchline here, we just always enjoy these, and who doesn't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. The show was produced by Carlotta Rebello and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Sarah Nichol, with editing assistance from Jack Dewars. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time on Monday. Thank you for listening and have a great weekend.